As has been said rightly, diabetics, retinopathy particularly is a raging problem. It's a vast structure, a vast topic, and I'll try my best to give you the main points which you must keep in mind, at least not only for your management and for your examination purpose also, because let me tell you, you cannot escape this disease in your examination. You have to have this case in your examination, and you have to be very careful as to how you answer back to your examiner. Well, I'll be dividing this talk into 3 or 4 components. The first is the epidemiology in brief, the clinical picture and the well set up trends of management, evidence-based change in our management strategies, and the last will be a few set cases for you where we'll interact if time permits as to what should be the management like in such cases. So I start with the first thing, that is the epidemiology. You all know that the number of diabetics are increasing tremendously, and there are various factors known about it, but what is most important is that it's affecting the productive years of a person, and the nation as such is suffering because of that. The incidence of diabetes worldwide, as seen in 2010, is about 100.8 million, but 1/5 of them have proliferative diabetic, but another 1/5 have diabetic macular edema, and you must remember diabetic macular edema is the commonest cause of ocular morbidity in diabetics. There are about 33.4 million with vision-threatening diabetic retinopathy the world over. In India, the situation is really bad. It is now called the world capital of diabetes. There are 31 million people with diabetes mellitus as recorded in 2000, and this is going to be more than double by 2030. The prevalence of diabetic retinopathy is ranging from 5% to 28% in these cases. Now, there are certain risk factors which are well established, which you must keep in mind when evaluating and treating these diabetics. They are the control or the uncontrolledness of the diabetes, the duration of the diabetes, hypertension, particularly the uncontrolled, hyperlipidemia, obesity, pregnancy, associated nephropathy, and cataract surgery, and if vitreous loss occurs during surgery, they tend to enhance the diabetic process in the eye. The factors which are supposed to be protective to the development of diabetic retinopathy are all those situations where the metabolism of the retina has gone down. This could be because of pigment epithelial atrophy or scarring, optic atrophy, myopes, particularly those who are more than 4 diopters, advanced glaucoma, and even unilateral carotid artery stenosis. Posterior vitreous detachment, if it occurs or if it is induced, retards both diabetic macular edema as well as the proliferative process. Now, if you look at the presentation in a case of diabetes, apparently they look very dissimilar. But what you have to remember is the genesis is from 2 common factors, and they are: number 1 is microvascular leakage. This happens because of endothelial cell damage leading to pericyte loss, because of pericyte loss and microaneurysms. And the resultant of that on one side is edema, which could be localized or diffuse, particularly in the macular area, and development of hard exudates, as you see here. And on the other side, the leakage leads to hemorrhages, which could be intraretinal, preretinal, or intravitreal. This is one set of conditions that occur in diabetes. And the other basic problem that is happening is microvascular occlusion. This microvascular occlusion is because of either capillary basement thickening, endothelial cell damage and proliferation, alterations in the RBC, and increased platelet stickiness. Whenever you have intravascular occlusion, particularly at the capillary level, what happens? The end result is retinal ischemia. And this ischemia induces formation of AV shunts, that is what you call intraretinal microangiopathy. And on the other side, it induces development of neovascular channels, either on the retina or on the optic nerve head or even in the iris. So it's a combination of leakage and occlusion which decides the picture in a diabetic retina. So this is what you have to remember. Now, looking at the age-old clinical picture, the earliest sign is presence of microaneurysm. These are small dot red things varying from 12 microns to 125 microns. Remember, more than 30 micron size are visible by ophthalmoscopy. Otherwise, they are more evident on fluorescein angiography, where they appear as hyperfluorescent dots. This is one of the earliest signs. The next thing to happen is the development of intraretinal hemorrhages. If they are deep, they are round. If they are superficial, they are flame-shaped. The third thing to occur is the development of exudates, which are hard exudates primarily, basically because of leakage of lipoproteins from the damaged capillaries. They appear as yellow, waxy, small lesions with well-defined margins. This is more serious. If you see development of soft exudates, which are white, fluffy, more superficial, this is a premonitor of severe ischemia of the retina. These are actually arterial infarcts which have occurred, and one has to be very, very careful at this stage. So if you can see the fluorescein angiography picture on the right, which shows large areas of adjacent capillary dropouts, as you see here. These are all large areas of capillary dropouts, as you see here extensive. And they're all corresponding to the areas of the soft exudates. Along with that, as the ischemia progresses, the veins become more irregular in lumen. There is beading. There is formation of loops. These are called omega loops, which is developed, as you see here. Besides that, you have reduplication and irregularity, as I said. These are all signs of progressive ischemia occurring in the retina. Intraretinal microangiopathy again is a sign of retinal ischemia. They apparently appear as a tuft of small vessels located between diseased arterioles and veins. If you do the fluorescein angiography, as you see here, they are usually close to an area of capillary non-perfusion. These are the irmas which have developed, and these again are an indicator of moderate to severe ischemia. Even if this is allowed to continue, the next stage is neovascularization. On the disc is apparent, but if it occurs within 1 disc diameter, that is also called NVD. This is what you must remember. Anything beyond 1 disc diameter becomes NVE. They leak profusely, and they are the probable cause of many problems that we face with proliferative retinopathy. As these things progress, these new vessels bleed subsequently because of traction and posterior vitreous detachment. There may be subhyaloid bleed, and there may be vitreal bleed also. This progresses further. You develop fibrous tissue along with the neovascularization. It leads to tractional retinal detachment. Subsequently, if the traction becomes more, there may be breaks in the retina, which makes it a combined retinal detachment. This is what the picture is usually. So you have two sets. One is proliferative diabetic retinopathy. The other is non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. How do you classify it? It's because of a management. Non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy has been divided into mild, moderate, severe, and very severe. For your ease, just remember, you must remember the features of severe NPDR. And you follow what is called as the 4-2-1 rule. That means 4 means 4 quadrants of hemorrhages. 2 is 2 quadrants of venous changes. And 1 is 1 quadrant of IRMA. If any of these features is present in one quadrant, that is severe NPDR. If it is present in more than two quadrants, that becomes very severe NPDR. If it is just microaneurysm that you see, that is mild NPDR. So these three things, if you remember, you can very well put the things as to what is the severity of non-proliferative diabetic retinopathy. As far as proliferative diabetic retinopathy is concerned, you must remember the features of high-risk proliferative diabetic retinopathy. And what is high-risk proliferative diabetic retinopathy? It is either NVD more than 1/4 or 1/3 to disc diameter, or NVE anywhere which is more than half disc diameter, or any neovascularization irrespective of its size if it is associated with pre-retinal or vitreous hemorrhage. These three things, if you look at, you find this is a high-risk PDR needing active management. Anything less than that becomes low-risk PDR. Okay. As you go further, you have tractional retinal, combined retinal detachment, I told you, and the end result is an end-stage diabetic retinopathy where the vessels dry out, the optic nerve becomes atrophic, and the retina also thins out. The visual prognosis is very poor. So this is the clinical scenario as to how we know what happens to a diabetic. This I was talking is about the peripheral retina particularly. I have still not told you anything about the macula. Next stage comes, what is diabetic maculopathy? Because this is the raging problem that we need to manage. In an average ophthalmologist can manage it very well. According to definition, macular edema is thickening of the retina within 1 disc diameter of the macula. If you have focal swelling of the macula, that is called focal maculopathy, and this is very well seen on angiography where you see focal leaks only. This is focal maculopathy. You have a small cluster of hard exudates close to the fovea, and corresponding to that you have areas of leakage. So the rest of the macular areas probably still not involved. This is focal maculopathy. Compare this with this condition. By definition, a diffuse maculopathy is one where you have retinal thickening of more than 2 disc diameters, a part of which might be encroaching onto the foveal avascular zone. Now look at this picture. Here you don't see much of hard exudates in the macular area, but the vision here is compromised, and if you see the angiography, this is what you see. A diffuse leakage, you cannot make out where from the leakage is occurring. This is called a diffuse diabetic macular edema. So on angiography and clinical picture, you can make out a focal leak, you can make out a diffuse leak, and the third thing that you can make out is what is called ischemic maculopathy, as you see here. The foveal avascular zone has been eroded. Now this is another type of maculopathy where if you look at the fundus, you find that there is nothing much wrong in the retinal picture. But the patient has a highly compromised vision. And that is when you do angiography in these patients, you find that the phase is broken. That is a clear sign of a ischemic maculopathy. So you have 3 types of maculopathy: focal maculopathy, diffuse maculopathy, exudative maculopathy, and the fourth component is a mixture of this, which is the mixed maculopathy. Probably the commonest is mixed maculopathy, where you have components of 1 or 2 in different combinations. Okay. What stage is this? This is a poser for you. According to you, what stage of diabetic retinopathy is this? This is a moderate NPDR if you look at the periphery because of the presence of soft exudates, and it's probably a exudative maculopathy with CSMA. Is it clear? Based on whatever we have talked about. Now, the management of these conditions were dictated by certain landmark studies, and I'll just give you the conclusion that they drew. The diabetic retinopathy study in 1971 first described what are the high risk characters of PDR, which I've already told you. It also told you that PRP or laser coagulation is able to reduce the risk of severe visual loss by more than 50% in these cases. So PRP became a gold standard in cases of proliferative diabetic retinopathy. It also told you that there are certain complications associated with this PRP, which could be a macular edema and a constriction of peripheral visual field. So one has to be careful about that. The next thing that happened was the study of ETDRS study in 1980, which addressed the problem of managing diabetic macular edema. They, for the first time, described what is clinically significant macular edema. I'm not going to the details of it, you know about it. But remember, anything abnormal within 500 microns of the center of the macula is CSLE. Whether it is edema, whether it is exudation, whether it is swelling, whatever it is. If it is within 500 microns, that means 1/3 the diameter of the disc. Anything wrong, it is CSLE. That is the easiest way to remember it. It also defined what is moderate visual loss, as to put in a definition. And it also told us the importance of grid laser and focal laser in diabetic macular edema. It defined, and that is how photocoagulation became a gold standard for diabetic retinopathy, and to some extent it still is. If it is peripheral involvement, you do PRP. If it is central involvement, you go for focal or grid laser. Okay. This study also told us about one more thing. I told you that one of the factors in diabetic genesis is increased platelet stickiness. So they thought if we give aspirin to these patients over a long period, maybe it will improve the diabetic process. But this study found out that aspirin in no way improves or deteriorates this condition. So that is not helpful at all in patients of diabetic retinopathy. The third landmark study at this time was the diabetic vitrectomy study. It told us that early vitrectomy within 1 to 2 months is very much advocated in type 1 diabetes if they are vitreous hemorrhage. And in type 2 diabetes, you can afford to wait. Two more studies, the DCCT study and the UKPDS study, told us the importance of good diabetic control, good control of hypertension, good control of renal functions, hyperlipidemia, anemia, and cessation of smoking. They all have a positive effect on the management of diabetic retinopathy. Okay. So based on these studies, they drew certain guidelines. And this is what it is. If macula is not involved, you can afford to keep them on follow-up. But the moment the macula gets involved, or if there is there's pregnancy, and if there is severe ischemia, you need to either do a very faster follow-up or you need to treat them. Very severe NPDR or early PDR, you have to treat. Similarly, high-risk PDR, you have to treat. Otherwise, you can afford to wait. But in our setup, remember, this wait can be disastrous at times. The moment you have even moderate to severe NPDR, it is better to treat them. In our scenario, where patient follow-up is a problem. The treatment for peripheral problems is the panretinal photocoagulation, and if the media is hazy, you go for anti-retinal cryopexy. The treatment for maculopathy is focal laser or the grid laser, and this was subsequently modified where instead of doing a 360-degree grid as was described in the ETDRS study, we would do a horseshoe grid like this here, and supplement with focal laser wherever they are leaking. This is the modified grid laser, which is now followed by most of us. Now, this is what the standard regimen of treatment was, and this is what most of them was following. But as we followed up these patients, we found that over a period of time, this grid laser for maculopathy was not working that well as we thought it would. There's a loss of vision, there's research continuation of macular edema, and the problems are more so in diffuse diabetic macular edema. And then they started thinking as to what could the issue be. And this was the time when they came out with this wonderful machine called OCT, optical coherence tomography. And Otani in 1999 first described these 4 distinct types of diabetic macular changes. The commonest is a sponge-like swelling, as you see here. Then you have cystoid macular edema. Then you have serous retinal detachment. And last is the vitreomacular traction. This can only be picked up by OCT, not by fluorescein angiography, which was the basis of our management earlier. And based on this, they found that laser was ineffective in these 4 groups of macular disorders. One is in ischemic maculopathy, then when you have vitreomacular traction, when you have serous retinal detachment associated, and fourth is if you have cystoid macular edema. And then they probably thought this could be the reason why this grid was not working in some of the cases. So then what? How to manage these cases now? Around the same time, we became more clever as to what is the cause of the pathogenesis of diabetic macular edema, and they found that this diabetic macular edema is not a passive process. It's an active process because of presence, degeneration of what we call VEGF factors and certain inflammatory mediators within the eye. This was causing a breakdown of the blood-retinal barrier, leading to fluid collection in the retina. And therefore they thought of using steroids as well as anti-VEGFs in the management of diabetic macular edema. This is how the genesis occurred. The commonest steroid which is used is the triamcinolone acetate. It can be given either deep subcutaneous or intravitreally. And it's effective both in primary and refractive stages of diabetic maculopathy. But the main problem, as is with all steroids, is short duration, repetitive injection, doesn't last more than 3 to 4 weeks after one shot usually. And there's progression of cataract and development of glaucoma. To get over this, these days there's a lot of work going on this intravitreal device, which is Ozurdex, which is a dexamethasone implant. It has a more longer duration of action. Probably it is still in the phase of trial. We still are not using it openly for diabetic macular edema. But maybe once you have the results of those trials, this may be used for diabetic macular edema. At the moment it is used for macular edema associated with venous occlusions. The second group of drugs which has become a rage these days is the anti-VEGFs. They not only decrease the inflammation, but they stop new vessel formation, they regress new vessel formation, and this decrease the leakage also. And that is where they find their indication in diabetic macular edema, but the main problem is the prohibitive cost and again repetitive injection. So you have pros and cons of both. So what to do? They found that these are 4 set of conditions where one of these drugs should be used. This one is when the edema has become refractive, when there is serious retinal detachment, when the retinal thickness is more than 350 micron on SD-OCT, and the fourth is if there is presence of cystoid macular edema. The first, prime the retina or treat this condition with one of these agents, and once the retina settles down, then probably you do laser. Instead of doing laser first and then finding that it's not responding. So first prime the red macula with one of these agents, and then go on to lasering subsequently. That will work better. As these drugs came, lot of studies started pouring in with the anti-VEGFs. Most of the studies has been with ranibizumab or Lucentis, and they found that in most of the studies like READ, RISE and RIDE, these are the studies you must know a little bit about. I'm not going into the details. RESOLVE and RESTORE. These 4 studies, they found that this drug either used as monotherapy or in combination of lasers does arrest the progression of the diabetic maculopathy, even proliferative diabetic retinopathy, and does cause a improvement in the vision. But again, the duration is short-lived. So what to do? Because you cannot keep on giving injections repeatedly. The average injection they found was about 4 per year. And over a period of 2 years, it is almost 7 injections. This was one study where they have studied bevacizumab in diabetic macular edema, and the reports have more or less been similar. It also works very well in arresting the diabetic macular edema. But again, the problem remains the same. The third group of drug that has been used is the wedge trap, which probably is the best of all these drugs because they say that it was more effective than laser photocoagulation in both preserving and improving visual acuity, but it is still in the experimental stages. We don't know what is the future about this drug. So as I said, the best option available to us these days is the combined therapy. And the rationale behind combined therapy is, initially you give one of these drugs which reduces the macular edema. This allows a better delivery of laser burns with lesser energy and also prevents the upregulation of VEGF factors post-laser. And this is what is done these days, and these are the indications when you go for this combined modality in a case of diabetic maculopathy. One is if the central thickness is more than 350 micron on SD-OCT, if there is associated serious macular detachment, and third is if there is macular edema along with proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Here you first give an intravitreal shot, and after 3 to 4 weeks, you repeat a OCT to see whether the macular thickness has come down or not. And if it has come down, do a macular grid. Now, once you give macular grid, the normal full threshold macular grid, they found that it was causing problems in the form of paracentral scotomas. And it was also causing problems in contrast sensitivity. And they found that these burns are too strong for the macula. And then they came out with 2 modalities. One is use the diode laser, which works on a deeper level and thereby can allow the neurosensory retina to escape. Because what you need in macular grid is a modulation of the pigment epithelium. We did not do anything to the retinal layers as such. If you can modulate the pigment epithelium, it will work. And thereby came the concept of either using a micropulse laser, that is what the diode laser, that is a variety of it, or use a subthreshold or a laser which is timed half than the normal intensity that it is. And they found that this also works very well as a macular grid alternative. Here, on the table, you don't see the burns at all, but if you do AFA subsequently, you can pick up those burns. And they found that the collateral damage was much less if you use this modality of treatment. So this is another innovation that is gradually creeping up. Now this controversy has come up, like if you do PRP, extensive PRP, it causes macular edema. If a patient already has macular edema and the macular edema is already more than 350 microns, what will you do? You can neither do PRP nor you can do macular grid. So how will you manage these cases? And particularly if a patient has a component of ischemic maculopathy also in these cases. Because in the ETDRS and DRS study, they said that first you have to treat the macular edema and then only laser the periphery. But here, because the macular edema is more, you cannot treat macular edema directly, and this is again where these intravitreal drugs have found their use. If you have macular edema, you have proliferative changes. First, prime the retina with one of these drugs intravitreally, and after 1 to 2 weeks, you do a repeat OCT, find that the things have settled down, it is laserable, and then go and do macular grade, followed by PRP. So this is another advantage of using these drugs in these cases. As far as surgery in cases of macular edema is concerned, this is another thing which has come up new. This is because they found that surgery is indicated in refractory as well as primary. There are some primary indications of macular edema. And the surgery consists of not only removing the diseased vitreous, but also doing a localized ILM peeling. And they said the reason for this is it decompresses the compartment around the macula, thereby allowing better oxygenation. It makes the retina more plastic. It debulks the vitreous and therefore decreases the load of the anti-VEGFs and the anti-inflammatory, and it also reduces the vitreomacular traction. Therefore, vitrectomy in certain cases is indicated in diabetic macular edema, and probably the foremost of this whenever you have vitreomacular traction, as diagnosed by OCT. For this condition, you have nothing else but surgery. So macular edema has a surgery as a sane macular edema also, besides medical treatment. This I have already told you. As far as proliferative diabetic retinopathy is concerned, yes, vitrectomy is definitely indicated, and these are certain indications: non-resolving vitreous hemorrhage, subhyaloid or premacular hemorrhage, tractional retinal detachment or combined retinal detachment. Then if you have extensive hemorrhages which is not allowing you to complete your PRP, and host cell glaucoma if it has developed. All these are indications for doing vitrectomy in a case of proliferative diabetic retinopathy. One point of caution: if we have done vitrectomy in a diabetic patient, if you have not been able to remove the vitreous completely, or if not been able to debulk the vitreous well, this invites VEGFs to travel anteriorly. And if you have failed in that surgery, you can actually worsen the eye. It causes a very fast neovascularization of the iris and neovascular glaucoma. And the eye can become very painful in a very short period. So whenever you are doing a diabetic vitrectomy, one has to be very careful as to the adequacy of the process that you have done. Never leave it halfway. It can create problems. And another problem that has been seen in doing in fresh cases of proliferative diabetic retinopathy, that they tend to bleed because the vessels are very friable and they tend to bleed. And therefore, to get over this, again anti-VEGFs have come to our rescue. Again, you prime these retina or the vitreous with anti-VEGFs first, keeping in mind that if you give anti-VEGFs in these drugs, they promote fibrovascular proliferation and they might cause in itself a tractional retinal detachment. So what you do is, you give anti-VEGFs, wait for 2 weeks or so, not more than that, and then go do the vitrectomy, because that way it doesn't allow enough time for the fibrous tissue to develop, and secondly, it regresses new vessels. So you get a virtually bleedless surgical field for you to do a more complete vitrectomy in this case. So this is what is being practiced everywhere these days. In cases of fresh vitreous hemorrhage, particularly in diabetics, you always prime the eye with anti-VEGFs before that, instead of straight away going to do vitrectomy. So you find there are a lot of indications of anti-VEGFs which has come, and as I said, you do again a combined modality, anti-vitreal VEGF. Within 15 days, you complete the vitrectomy. And they found that the incidence of per-op bleeding as well as post-op macular edema has gone down drastically. Now, whenever you do a vitrectomy, it's a surgical process and your aim is to remove the vitreous. Remember, induction of PVD in diabetics is a very, very difficult task. And it can be traumatic more often than not. You create iatrogenic tears also. So they started thinking of using a safer modality, and they started thinking of what you call a pharmacological vitreolysis. Inject a drug in the vitreous, it causes a posterior vitreous detachment, and there subsequently vitrectomy becomes much easier. And the drug which is being increasingly tried is this microplasmin. Microplasmin is a enzymatic drug which is known to cause a posterior vitreous detachment. And it is being used in many cases of vitreous hemorrhage, and this is a drug which is being tried increasingly in cases of vitreous hemorrhage in this drug. So in conclusion, I will say that diabetic retinopathy is one of the most important causes of ocular morbidity. Although PDR is a more severe stage, visual loss and morbidity is mostly due to diabetic maculopathy. Systemic metabolic control is of extreme importance. Despite the use of drugs, lasers still remain the gold standard. However, there are certain indications of using these drugs prior to laser, and they are patients with serious macular detachment, retinal thickness more than 350 microns, cystoid macular edema, and here you have to prime the eye first with these drugs. OCT and FMA have to go hand in hand, which to diagnose as well as to monitor. Subthreshold laser is worth a try in these cases of macular grade. Vitrectomy has its own place in cases of diabetic retinopathy. And pharmacological vitreolysis will gradually come to stay. So for you, the takeaway message is the management guidelines. Systemic parameters you should never forget. Please, whenever a patient of diabetic retinopathy comes to you, there is no hurrying in giving a laser therapy in that. Please assess the patient from the systemic point of view. Give him adequate time for the diabetic process to settle down. And this is in terms of not only blood sugar levels, his kidney functions, his lipid profile, as well as his hypertension. Because they have said if these factors can be controlled, diabetic process tends to cool down quite a lot. Once you have done this, then you do a OCT and an angiogram. OCT helps in distinguishing between the non-tractional and tractional form of maculopathy, where the treatment is different. Depending upon the FA leak, you either have a focal leak or a diffuse leak or a ischemic leak. After 4 to 6 of good metabolic control, you have two scenarios. One scenario is that the macular thickness is less than 350 micron, or there is focal leakage, you straight away go for laser. The other scenario is the thickness is more than 350 micron, there is cystoid macular edema or serious macular detachment, or there is diffuse leakage, or there is associated proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Here, first you prime the vitreous cavity and the retina with these drugs, bring down the edema, and then do laser. Refractory diabetic macular edema and edema with macular traction, you have to go for vitrectomy procedure. Well, this is what I have to do. Do you have some time now? Yes. Okay, I give you these posers before you. The answers given to me is by my residents. And let me see how we come to hand in hand to what they have said. Now, this was a case of diabetic retinopathy with a hemoglobin A1C of 5.8 and vision of 6/36. What is the diagnosis? Fast. Any one of you? This apparently appears to be a case of NPDR with early maculopathy. Isn't it? We agree with that? This is the angiogram where you see some leakages, and this is what you find, that the thickness is about 356, as you see here. It's just about borderline, but there are certain cystoid changes available. The foveal contour is gone. So what will you do? What should be the line of management? Well, this line of management suggested by my residents was this. Give him time for a metabolic control, do focal laser coagulation, and follow up after 3 months. Do you agree with this or no? If you go at this level, the leakage, as you see here, is a little away from the fovea. This is somewhere here, isn't it? I'll go with what my residents have said. The reason is you don't leave. The thing is, you have to decide whether you have to treat or not to treat. Vision is 6/36. Should you treat or not to treat? Remember, if the vision falls below 6/12, you have to treat. 6/12 is the cutoff line. Now, there are two options in this case. One is you give intravitreal VEGFs, bring down the macular edema because there are some cystoid changes. And second is you go for straight focal laser coagulation. Remember, anti-VEGFs, they are costly, they carry their own chances of risk. So I don't see any risk in trying a focal laser coagulation with good metabolic control in this case in the first instance. Wait for some time, you find the things are not responding, you have the subsequent line of management available with you. This case, the vision was 6/60. 58 or old male, what is the diagnosis? Yes? This is the FA picture. This I am showing you how fluorescein alone can be so misdirective. If you look at this, you will find there is hardly any leakage. But at the same time, you find there are signs of moderate NPDR. The macular status, the vision is 6/60. But what will you do in this case? Will you go for the macular grid here? What will you do? That is why I said never just depend on FA alone. You always should do OCT. And this makes your life much more simpler. You find that there is subserous detachment. The serous detachment. So the line becomes very clear. You have to prime the retina first with anti-VEGF or something. Bring down this elevation and then go for macular grid. Okay. So this is what they suggested, and I agree with this. Third scenario. What is the diagnosis? There is no more NPDR. It's a proliferative diabetic retinopathy. Now the question is, you find that in the macular area there are a lot of hemorrhages. Isn't it? This is the FA. What will you do? It's very obvious that this is a case of proliferative diabetic retinopathy. PRP has to be done. Now the question is, we don't know what is underlying in the macular area. If you just blindly do PRP, you might cause more harm. So this is where the role comes of either giving a deep substance steroids so as to reduce the edema and do PRP in phases. Or if you are more energetic, you may even give anti-VEGF in these cases initially, which might clear this hemorrhage, might decrease the edema, give a better view, do a macular grade followed by PRP. These are the options available. They suggested this. This again is an agreeable line of management, but then you have to weigh the pros and cons of the line of management. But remember, PRP alone should never be done. You have to take care of the macular status before you complete PRP. This is what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.